In 1998, Trey Parker and Matt Stone aired an episode in which a small bearded creature explained the entire logic of American capitalism while stealing underwear from a child's dresser at 3:30 in the morning. The boys delivering the message were 10 years old. The argument was that big corporations exist because customers prefer the products they sell. 27 years later, the same two men signed a $1.5 billion deal with the company that owns South Park, and 2 days after signing, aired an episode publicly accusing that same company of corruption on behalf of the federal government. The episode was released anyway. The company paid for it anyway. Across nearly 3 decades, the show has watched the American economy move from coffee shops to superstores to platforms to crypto to streaming wars, and the way it has treated each phase tells the story of the system itself. Welcome to East Park. Let's get into it. Gnomes, Harbucks, and the most honest offensive capitalism the show ever wrote. There is a particular kind of South Park episode that does not get talked about in the way the famous episodes get talked about. The famous episodes are the ones with the clear villains and the loud political targets and the celebrities the show has chosen to humiliate that week. Those episodes get the press coverage. Those episodes get the academic papers and the long retrospectives and the inclusion in best of lists. There is a different kind of episode, however, that does something quieter and stranger. The quieter episode is the one that delivers an argument the audience is not expecting to hear, in a voice the audience is not expecting to hear it from, about a subject the audience already thought they understood. The quieter episode does not announce itself as an argument. The quieter episode disguises itself as a normal cartoon and lets the argument come through the back door, when the audience is paying attention to a coffee shop and a school assignment and a hyperactive boy named Tweek who claims that gnomes are stealing his underwear. That episode aired on the 16th of December in 1998. It was the 17th episode of the second season of South Park. It was the 30th episode of the series overall. It was titled Gnomes. It was written by Trey Parker, Matt Stone, and Pam Brady. It was directed by Parker. It was, by the standards of the show's own internal canon, the first sustained engagement the show had ever attempted with the subject of capitalism, the subject of corporations, and the subject of the relationship between small businesses and large ones. The episode is, in the assessment of a literary critic and economic theorist named Paul Cantor, who taught college courses built around the episode for years afterward, the most fully developed defense of capitalism the show would ever produce. Cantor is not a small voice in this debate. Cantor was a professor of English at the University of Virginia. Cantor wrote books and academic essays about popular culture as a vehicle for economic argument. Cantor used the episode in his classrooms as a piece of evidence about how a cartoon could deliver a thesis about market structure that a respectable economics textbook would have a harder time delivering. The episode, in Cantor's reading, is doing something that the political vocabulary of the late 1990s was not particularly equipped to do, which is to make the case for large corporations against small businesses without making the audience feel that the case is being made by a corporate lobbyist. The plot of the episode begins, as many South Park episodes do, inside the school. Mr. Garrison is under pressure from the school board. He has been informed that he will lose his job if he cannot demonstrate that his class is being taught about current events. He responds to this pressure in the only way Garrison ever responds to pressure, which is by passing the pressure on to the boys. He gives them a homework assignment. They are to deliver a presentation to the town committee about a current event. The presentation is to be delivered in front of the actual elected officials of South Park. The assignment is described as a way of proving that the boys have been receiving an education that prepares them for serious civic participation. The boys, in the way that 10-year-old boys respond to assignments of this nature, do not particularly want to do the work. They are grouped, for the purposes of the assignment, with a boy named Tweek. This is the first episode of the show in which Tweek appears as a character. He is, in the design choices Parker made for him at the time, a hyperactive child who consumes large quantities of coffee because his parents, who run the local coffee shop, give him coffee throughout the day under the apparent belief that this is normal parenting. Tweek shakes. Tweek twitches. Tweek speaks in short bursts of nervous energy. Tweek is, in his own internal experience of the world, convinced that gnomes are visiting his bedroom at 3:30 in the morning and stealing his underpants. Nobody believes him. His parents assume he is hallucinating from the caffeine. The boys, when they are assigned to work with him, are reluctant. They go to his house anyway. They are given coffee by his parents, which leaves them wired and incapable of writing the report. As 3:30 in the morning approaches, Tweek's father enters the bedroom with a different idea. Mr. Tweek tells the boys that they could write their report about a real current event happening to the Tweek family at that very moment. The current event, Mr. Tweak explains, is that a large national chain of coffee houses called Starbucks is trying to open a location in South Park. Starbucks is, in the visual logic of the episode, an exact stand-in for the actual coffee chain Starbucks, which in 1998 was in the middle of its national expansion into small American towns. Starbucks, Mr. Tweak explains, is going to destroy his small family business. The Tweak Brothers Coffee House will not be able to compete. The coffee will be inferior, in his telling. The corporate model will steamroll the local model. The town of South Park will lose its character. The boys, he tells them, should write their report about the threat that big corporations pose to small businesses and the local way of life. This is the moment the episode begins to do its real work. Mr. Tweak hands the boys a pre-written speech. The speech is, in its tone and its content, exactly the kind of speech that anyone living in an American small town in the late 1990s would have heard delivered earnestly at city council meetings and chamber of commerce gatherings across the country. The speech says that corporations have no souls. The speech says that small businesses are the heart of America. The speech says that the local matters more than the global. The speech is, in the way Parker has constructed it inside the episode, presented as the obvious correct opinion that the boys are expected to deliver. The boys deliver it. They deliver it badly, in the way that 10-year-old boys deliver speeches they have not written and do not understand. The town committee, however, is moved. The committee believes the boys have spoken from the heart. The committee agrees that something must be done. The mayor announces a town vote on whether Starbucks will be allowed to open. The vote is scheduled for the following day. The boys, in the meantime, have actually encountered the Gnomes. Tweak's claim turns out to be correct. The Gnomes are real. They arrive in his bedroom at 3:30 in the morning, exactly as he has been saying for the entire episode. They are small, bearded creatures wearing red shirts and blue pants and pointed hats. They sing a song while they work. The song describes their occupation. They are in the business, in their own account, of stealing underpants. They take the underpants back to a vast underground cavern where the underpants are sorted and stored. The boys, on discovering this, want to know what the Gnomes plan to do with all of the underpants. The Gnomes are, by their own self-description, experts in business. They run a corporation. They have a plan. The plan is presented to the boys in the form of a chart, which the Gnomes display in their cavern with apparent pride. The chart has 3 phases. Phase 1 is collect underpants. Phase 3 is profit. The boys ask, in the obvious way, what phase 2 is. The Gnomes do not have an answer. The chart does not have anything written in the space for phase 2. The Gnomes are not embarrassed about this. They have, in their own internal logic, complete confidence that phase 2 will reveal itself in due course. They explain to the boys, with the calm patience of corporate veterans, how the underwear collection industry actually functions. They explain mergers. They explain margins. They explain the way large corporations come into existence. They explain that almost every big corporation in the world started as a small business, and the ones that became big because they offered a product that more people wanted than the smaller alternatives could provide. This is the part of the episode that has carried the longest cultural weight outside of the show. The chart with the missing phase 2 has become, in the decades since the episode aired, one of the most widely cited pieces of business vocabulary produced by any animated program in American history. The economist Paul Krugman, who would later win a Nobel Prize, has referenced the Gnomes in his discussions of speculative bubbles and venture capital. The Tesla founder Elon Musk used the chart as a deliberate joke in a presentation about Mars colonization in September of 2016. The chart appears in business school slide decks. The chart appears in startup pitches as a self-mocking acknowledgement that the entrepreneur does not yet know how the business will actually make money. The phrase phase 2 has become a shorthand in technology and finance for the gap between activity and outcome, for the way ambitious projects can run on enormous energy and enormous infrastructure and enormous belief without anyone in the room being able to articulate the specific mechanism by which the activity will eventually become the outcome. The Gnomes in this reading were never just stealing underwear. The Gnomes were a satirical portrait of an entire mode of American economic confidence that the late 1990s had begun to produce in industrial quantities. What the Gnomes tell the boys, beneath the surface absurdity, is the actual thesis of the episode. The thesis is that large corporations exist for reasons. The reasons are not always sinister. Large corporations have grown to be large because the products they offer are products that consumers, given a free choice, have chosen to buy more often than the alternatives. The expansion of a corporation, in the Gnomes account, is not a hostile invasion of the small town. The expansion is a downstream consequence of choices the people of the small town have already already been making, one purchase at a time for as long as the corporation has existed. Computers, the Gnomes point out, exist because of large corporations. Cars exist because of large corporations. Most of the products that the people of South Park use in their daily lives exist because at some point in the past, a small business made a product good enough that it grew into a large business. Starbucks, in this account, was once a small coffee shop too. The fact that it has grown is not evidence that it has done something wrong. The fact that it has grown is evidence that it has done something well. The boys, the next day at the town vote, deliver this argument instead of the one Mr. Tweak wrote for them. They explain to the committee that corporations are good. They explain that without big corporations, the town would not have the comforts it takes for granted. They explain that the existence of a Starbucks location in South Park is not a threat to the soul of the town. It is, in their reading, a normal feature of how an economy actually grows. The committee, having been moved the day before by the anti-corporate speech, is now stunned. The boys are no longer reading from Mr. Tweak's script. They are saying something the committee was not prepared to hear. What happens next is the move that finishes the argument. Mrs. Tweak, the wife of the coffee shop owner, walks up to the boys and applauds them. She tells the gathered townspeople that nobody has actually tried the Starbucks coffee. They have been arguing about it, protesting about it, organizing against it for the entire episode, without any of them having tasted the actual product. She suggests that perhaps the town should try the coffee before deciding to ban it. The townspeople, having been so committed to their position the day before, agree to try. They taste the Starbucks coffee. They love it. They concede on the spot that it is better than the coffee Tweak Bros has been selling them for years. The Starbucks representative, who has been in the background of the episode the entire time, takes the moment with grace. He offers Mr. Tweak a job. Mr. Tweak will be the manager of the new Starbucks location. The salary will be more than the coffee shop ever made. Mr. Tweak accepts. The conflict that has driven the entire plot collapses inside the final minute of the episode. The episode ends with the town getting its Starbucks. The Tweak family is, in material terms, better off than they were at the beginning of the episode. The boys are no longer being used as political instruments by an adult who needed them for his own purposes. The town has not been destroyed. The town has been given a better product. The local way of life, in the actual cash terms that determine whether anyone can afford to live a local way of life, has been improved. What Cantor identified in his academic readings of the episode across the years that followed was a particular quality of the argument the episode was making. The argument was not pro-corporate in the cheerleading sense. The argument was not asking the audience to admire corporations. The argument was making a structural observation about what corporations are. They are, in the episode's reading, the visible result of a long sequence of small consumer choices accumulated over years. They are not separate from the population. They are an expression of the population's preferences, magnified and infrastructured into the form of a company. The small business owner in the episode was not the moral hero he claimed to be. He was using a child's school assignment as a lobbying instrument. He was protecting an inferior product. He was, in his own scene with the boys late at night, willing to draft propaganda for them and then send them to deliver it to elected officials without telling them what it meant. The corporation, by contrast, was simply trying to sell coffee that more people preferred to drink. The moral inversion of the standard small-town narrative was the actual content of the episode. Cantor argued in his work that no other episode of South Park he had taught in his classroom had produced as much hostile reaction from his students as Gnomes did, and that the reason was that the episode forced the students to confront a position about the economy that their cultural environment had trained them to reject before they had heard it. This was, in December of 1998, the show's first major engagement with the economic logic of the country it was operating inside of. The episode did not signal that it was about to engage with that logic. The episode disguised the engagement inside a coffee shop plot and an underwear gag and a hyperactive child with bad parenting. The audience was not expecting an argument about corporate growth and consumer preference. The audience got one anyway. The argument has lasted in cultural memory and in business school lectures and in the vocabulary of the technology industry longer than almost any other piece of writing Parker and Stone would produce in the show's first decade. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Gnomes was the show's quiet opening statement on capitalism, delivered through coffee, underwear, and a missing phase 2. 6 years later, the argument would be tested against an actual big box retailer arriving in a fictional Colorado town. Section 2, something Walmart this way comes, and the argument that the consumer is the engine. There is a way that small towns in the United States talk about the arrival of a large retail chain. The way of talking has a particular shape and a particular sound. It is a way of talking that has been familiar to anyone who lived in or near a small American town in the 1990s and the early 2000s, when the rapid expansion of a particular kind of superstore across the country became one of the defining domestic economic stories of the period. The way of talking goes something like this. The chain has come to the edge of town. The locals are worried. The local businesses are worried. The local newspaper writes editorials. The local clergy gives sermons. The local politicians make speeches. The chain opens anyway. The locals go to the opening anyway. The bargains are too good to resist. The crowd that protests the opening on Monday is the same crowd that fills the parking lot on Saturday. The local businesses close, one by one, over the following years. The downtown empties. The chain wins. The town discovers, sometime after the fact, that the people who allowed the chain to win were the people in the town themselves, every time they made the choice to shop there. This narrative was, by the autumn of 2004, so familiar to the American public that almost every viewer of South Park knew the shape of it before any specific episode about it ever aired. The retail chain at the center of the narrative was Walmart. The chain had grown, across the previous 2 decades, from a regional Arkansas business into the largest private employer in the United States. The chain had been the subject of documentaries, of investigative journalism, of academic studies, of political campaigns. The chain had become, in the cultural vocabulary of the early 2000s, the symbol of a particular kind of consolidation that critics on both the left and the right were beginning to find disturbing. The chain had defenders. The chain had detractors. The chain had, regardless of what anyone said about it, continued to grow. South Park, in the autumn of 2004, decided to engage with this subject directly. The episode aired on Comedy Central in the United States on the 3rd of November in 2004. It was the 9th episode of the 8th season. It was the 120th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It was titled Something Walmart This Way Comes. The title was a reference to the Ray Bradbury novel Something Wicked This Way Comes, in which a sinister traveling carnival arrives in a small Midwestern town and begins to corrupt its inhabitants. The reference was deliberate. The episode treated the arrival of the superstore in South Park as exactly the kind of event the Bradbury novel had used a haunted carnival to describe. Something dangerous had arrived. The town did not know what to do with it. The town's relationship to the dangerous thing was more complicated than either the town or the dangerous thing could fully admit. The episode opens, as many South Park episodes do, with the boys in the street. Cartman has decided to share with Stan and Kyle a claim he has heard. The claim is that when people die, they soil themselves in the moment of death. Kyle finds the claim ridiculous. Cartman offers him a bet, $5, then later $15, that the claim is true. The bet runs throughout the episode as a small comic structure, with Cartman finding incidental ways to win it as various characters die in the foreground of the larger plot. This is a typical South Park technique. The small comic structure provides a constant background, while the main plot delivers the actual argument. The main plot begins when Mr. Garrison interrupts the boys' conversation to tell them that something important is happening at Metzger's field. The boys arrive at the field with the rest of the town. The new South Park Walmart is opening. The store is enormous. The prices are low. The bargains are unbelievable. The town floods inside. Marvin Marsh, Stan's grandfather, has been hired as an employee. Jimmy Vollmer has also been hired. The town shops with the enthusiasm of people who have been waiting a long time for something exactly like this. Cartman, in the movie section, finds a deal that captures in one small joke the central psychological mechanism the entire episode is going to dissect. He finds a film called Time Cop on DVD. The store is offering 3 copies for $18. Kyle asks him why he would want 3 copies of the same movie. Cartman explains with complete sincerity that buying 1 copy alone would cost $9.98, but buying 3 copies for $18 saves $20. Kyle points out that he does not actually want even 1 copy of Time Cop. Cartman has not considered this. The deal has overpowered the question of what is actually being purchased. This small exchange is the entire thesis of the episode in miniature. The seduction of the bargain is doing the actual work. The product is incidental. The customer is not making a decision about whether the product is worth buying. The customer is making a decision about whether the price represents a deal. The deal is the thing being consumed. The product is the byproduct of the deal. The store has, in this reading, succeeded in selling its customers the experience of saving money. money, an experience that has very little to do with whether the items being purchased have any use to the person purchasing them. Cartman, with 3 unwanted copies of Time Cop in his basket, is the perfect representative of the customer the store has been designed to produce. The town's relationship to the new store quickly turns pathological. The shoppers cannot stay away. They stop going to the locally owned businesses on the main street. Jim's Drugs loses its customers. The hardware store loses its customers. The clothing store loses its customers. The local economy of the downtown collapses, one shop at a time, exactly in the pattern that small-town newspapers across the country had been describing for the previous decade. The store, meanwhile, expands. The crowds inside grow larger. The aisles grow longer. The lights grow brighter. The town becomes dependent on the store for nearly all of its retail needs. Randy Marsh, at a town meeting, delivers a speech that the episode treats as the central diagnosis. The Walmart, he says to the assembled townspeople, was them. The store did not arrive against their wishes. The store was an extension of the choices they had been making. Every time they walked through the doors, every time they filled a basket, every time they accepted a low price for an item they did not need, they had built the store one transaction at a time. The store's growth was their growth. The store's hold over the town was a hold they had each personally agreed to, day after day, for the entire period since the opening. The destruction of the local businesses was something they had personally caused, by spending the money that had previously gone to those businesses inside the new store instead. The store was not an invader. The store was a mirror. The store was, in Randy's framing, the visible accumulation of what the people of South Park had wanted more than they had wanted to keep the town the way it had been. The boys take action. Stan and Kyle, with Cartman attempting to undermine them at every turn, set out to destroy the Walmart. They burn it down. The store is reduced to a smoking ruin. The townspeople, watching the building burn, swear that they will never shop in such a store again. They walk back toward the center of town. They look at one another. They consider what they have just done. They feel, briefly, like people who have reclaimed their own community. The feeling does not last. The next morning, a new Walmart has been built in place of the old one. The store is, in the canon of the episode, indestructible in the conventional sense. It can be burned. It cannot be ended. The crowds return. The lines reform. The town goes back inside. Stan and Kyle realize that physical destruction is not the answer. The actual heart of the Walmart, they are told by an old employee they encounter, lies elsewhere. They will need to travel to the corporate headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas in order to find it. The reference to Bentonville is the real-world headquarters of the actual Walmart Corporation, a town in northwestern Arkansas where Sam Walton founded the company in 1962 and where the company has remained based ever since. The episode uses the real geography deliberately. The fictional pilgrimage of the boys mirrors the actual movements of the company's actual logistics network. Bentonville, in the episode, is the place where the answer waits. The boys travel to the headquarters. They are led by an old employee through corridors and security checkpoints toward what he calls the heart of the Walmart. The journey is structured as a parody of horror movie pacing. The lights dim, the corridors lengthen. The boys are warned, repeatedly, that what they are about to see will change the way they understand the entire situation. They reach a final chamber. The chamber contains the heart of the Walmart. The heart, when revealed, is a mirror. Stan and Kyle stare into the mirror. The old employee explains what they are seeing. The heart of the Walmart is the consumer. The store has no separate existence from the people who shop in it. The store is the customer made flesh. The customer is the store made into a building. The two are the same thing in different forms. The destruction of the store is impossible because the store cannot be destroyed as long as the consumer continues to exist. The consumer is the engine. The store is the visible output of the engine. The only way to destroy the Walmart, the old employee tells them, is to stop being the kind of person who shops at one. The destruction has to happen inside the customer, not in the building. The boys return to South Park with this information. They share it with Randy. Randy delivers his speech at the meeting. The townspeople listen. They agree that they have been the problem. They agree that they have allowed the store to do this to their town. They agree that they will change. Jimbo suggests in the moment that the town should now patronize the local Jim's Drugs instead of the corporate store. Everyone agrees. They walk to Jim's Drugs together. They begin shopping there. They feel good about themselves. The episode then delivers its final move. A time lapse plays. Jim's Drugs grows. The store expands. The crowds inside grow larger. The aisles grow longer. The lights grow brighter. The store, over the course of the time lapse, gradually comes to resemble the Walmart that the town has just destroyed. The store reaches the same scope. The store, by all visible indicators, has become the same kind of operation, with the same kind of consequences, against the same kind of community. The final shot of the time time-lapse shows the town once again burning down a giant store, this time a giant Jim's Drugs, exactly as they had burned down the Walmart in the previous act. Randy, watching the second store burn, says that they should not make that mistake again. Mr. Garrison agrees and suggests that they should all shop from now on at the True Value down the street. The townspeople agree. They walk off toward the True Value together. The episode ends on this image. The cycle is about to begin again. What the episode is arguing beneath the comedy is that the small business and the large corporation are not separate moral categories. They are sequential phases in the same process. The Jim's Drugs that the town turned to in order to escape the Walmart is going to become a Walmart because the conditions that created the original Walmart, the appetite of the consumer, the willingness to chase a bargain, the preference for convenience over community, are still operating inside the same population. The boycott did not work because the boycott did not address the engine. The engine continued to run. The store the engine produced was, predictably, the same kind of store that had been produced the first time. The cycle is not a corruption of the system. The cycle is the system functioning exactly as the system has always functioned. The episode also delivers, as a side effect of its central argument, one of the sharpest single observations about consumer psychology that any animated program has put on television. The mirror at the heart of the Walmart is not a clever metaphor for an abstract economic concept. The mirror is a literal description of how the store actually works. The customer arrives, looks into the aisles, sees products that match preferences the customer has been trained to have, takes the products to the register, pays for them, takes them home. The store does not impose anything on the customer. The store reflects back in physical form what the customer wanted before the customer walked in. The store is, in this reading, a feedback mechanism. The customer feeds the store with money. The store feeds the customer with products. Neither is independent of the other. To destroy the store, you have to alter the customer. To alter the customer, you have to alter something deeper than what any boycott or protest or burning building can reach. You have to alter the appetite. The appetite is not under the control of the protester. The appetite is under the control of the person who has it. The episode aired during the second term of George W. Bush, in the year of his re-election, in a country that had spent the previous 5 years moving deeper into the kind of consolidated retail environment the episode was depicting. The actual Walmart Corporation had, by 2004, become the largest private employer in the world. The actual Walmart Corporation had, by 2004, been the subject of 100 academic studies and 1,000 news articles about its effect on small American towns. The actual Walmart Corporation had, by 2004, become a campaign issue in some local and state elections. The episode landed in that environment without giving the audience a clear villain to hate. The villain in the episode was the audience. The villain was the consumer. The villain was the appetite that the consumer had brought into the store with them. The argument was, in this respect, an extension of the argument the show had been making since the Gnomes episode in 1998. The argument was that the corporation is not separate from the population that uses it. The corporation is what the population builds when the population gets what it has been asking for. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Section 2. Walmart taught the show that consumer behavior is the engine, and that no corporation arrives without an invitation. The next move would aim the same logic at a consent form nobody reads, and a Cupertino executive with a strange grin. Section 3. Human Centipede and the birth of the show's tech capitalism era. There is a moment that happens to nearly everyone who uses a piece of consumer technology in the modern world. The moment happens at the beginning of the relationship between the user and the device. The moment is small. The moment is forgettable. The moment passes quickly, in most cases without the user retaining any memory of having experienced it. The moment is the one in which the user is presented with a document several thousand words long, written in legal English, describing the conditions under which the user is being permitted to use the device or the service. The document is called the Terms and Conditions, or the Terms of Service, or the End User License Agreement, depending on the vocabulary the particular company has chosen to use. The document is, in nearly every case, longer than the user has any intention of reading. The document is, in nearly every case, scrolled past quickly. The document is, in nearly nearly every case agreed to with a single tap of a button that says I agree or I accept or continue. The user has, in that single tap, consented to a contractual relationship the user has not read and does not understand. The user has, in that single tap, granted the company permissions the user could not name if asked. The user has, in that single tap, become a party to an agreement that exists in legal form but not in conscious form. By the spring of 2011, this small moment had become one of the most quietly significant transactions in the daily life of any American who owned a phone, a computer, a streaming account, or a piece of software. The transaction was happening millions of times a day across the country. The transaction was, by the design of nearly every consumer technology company in the world, structured in a way that made it difficult for the user to do anything other than accept. The product would not work without acceptance. The account would not open without acceptance. The update would not install without acceptance. The user who wanted the product was given a choice between reading thousands of words of legal English and accepting whatever those words said or not having the product. Almost every user, almost every time, chose the second option, which was to accept the words without reading them. South Park, on the 27th of April in 2011, decided to engage with this small moment directly. The episode aired on Comedy Central as the season premiere of the 15th season of the show. It was the 210th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It was titled Human Centipede, stylized with a capital H and a capital C and a lowercase I in the middle, in a deliberate parody of the visual branding conventions that Apple had been using for its product names for the previous decade. The episode was, in the working canon of the show, the first sustained engagement with what the audience would later come to call platform capitalism. The earlier capitalism episodes of South Park had been about coffee shops and big box retailers, the visible, old-fashioned brick-and-mortar economy in which transactions happened across counters and products came home in physical bags. Human Centipede was different. The product at the center of Human Centipede was a tablet computer. The corporation at the center was Apple. The transaction at the center was a tap on a screen that the user did not understand. The plot is structured, as many South Park episodes are, around two parallel storylines that come together in the third act. The first storyline involves Kyle Broflovsky. Kyle, in the opening minutes of the episode, has downloaded the latest update to iTunes on his computer. The update, before installing, has presented him with the standard terms and conditions document. Kyle, like every other user of every other piece of software in the real world, has scrolled past the document without reading it and has tapped the button that says he agrees. He has then moved on with his day. He has gone to school. He has met up with his friends. He has done the things a 10-year-old boy does. He has, in his own internal experience, completed an entirely routine interaction with a piece of consumer software. Within a few hours of his having tapped the button, Kyle is being chased through the streets of South Park by a group of Apple employees. The employees are dressed in identical clothing. The employees are calm. The employees are professional. The employees are insistent that Kyle accompany them somewhere. Kyle, who has no idea what they are talking about, runs. He runs to his father's law office. He bursts into Gerald Broflovsky's office and tries to explain what is happening. Gerald, before he can fully understand the situation, is tased by the Apple employees. Kyle is taken. He is placed in a cage. The cage contains two other people who have also been taken. One is a Japanese man named Junichi Takayama. The other is a young woman. All three of them have one thing in common. All three of them have, in the recent past, agreed to a set of terms and conditions without reading the agreement first. The boys, meanwhile, learn what has happened. They are visited by another set of Apple employees who explain to them, with the same calm, professional tone, that Kyle has consented to participate in a product development project that the company is currently conducting. The boys ask what the product is. The employees show them a presentation. The product is, in the canon of the episode, a human centipede, modeled on the 2009 Dutch horror film of the same name, in which a deranged surgeon sews three people together, mouth to anus, to form a single connected digestive tract. The Apple version of the product is the same, except that the connected human chain is also a functioning tablet computer. The three people in the cage are about to be sewn together. They are then going to be deployed as a piece of consumer hardware. The product will be called the Human Centipede. The product will be marketed at the next Apple keynote event. The company is, in the episode's deadpan framing, planning to launch the product within days. The boys ask whether this is legal. The Apple employees explain that it is. Kyle, when he downloaded the iTunes update, state, agreed to the terms and conditions. The terms and conditions, the employees explain, included a clause permitting Apple to take physical custody of the user and to surgically modify the user as part of new product development. The clause was on page 18 of the document. The clause was written in standard contract English. The clause was, in legal terms, fully binding. Kyle did not read it. Kyle agreed to it. The agreement is enforceable. The company is now exercising its rights under the agreement. There is, the employees explain with the same calm tone, nothing to be done. Butters, in one of the small running jokes of the episode, demonstrates that he has read his own copy of the agreement. He reads aloud in his small, careful voice from the actual text. The text contains the line about Apple being permitted to sew the user's mouth to another user's posterior. Butters considers the line. Butters declines to agree to the terms. He clicks decline. He is therefore not in the cage. The joke is structural. The user who reads is exempt from the consequences. The user who does not read is liable for everything. The number of users who read is functionally zero. The number of users who do not read is functionally everyone. The consent system in the world the episode is depicting is therefore not a consent system at all. The consent system is a paperwork ritual that the company performs in order to obtain legal coverage for actions it intends to take, regardless of whether the user understands what is being agreed to. The second storyline of the episode involves Cartman. Cartman, in his own household, has been demanding that his mother Leanne purchase him an iPad. Leanne has resisted. The Cartman household does not have the kind of money that supports the purchase of an Apple tablet for a 10-year-old child. Leanne offers instead to buy Cartman a Toshiba Handybook. The Toshiba Handybook is, in the episode's framing, a cheaper alternative that runs the same kind of software. Cartman is enraged by the offer. The Toshiba is, in his account, an insult. The Toshiba is a substitute for the real product. The Toshiba is an admission of failure. Cartman, in his rage, begins to accuse his mother of abusing him by refusing to buy him the device that all of his classmates already have. This subplot escalates across the episode. Cartman appears on the Dr. Phil television program. He delivers, on national television, an emotional account of his mother's mistreatment of him, framed in language that suggests serious abuse. The audience of the program is moved. The audience sides with Cartman. Leanne, who has done nothing wrong, is publicly humiliated. The producers of the program, as a gesture of consolation, present Cartman with the first ever Humancenti pad, freshly assembled, 3 people sewn together in the configuration the company has been developing. Cartman is given the device on national television. He is overjoyed. He has, in his own framing, finally received what he was owed. The two storylines collide. Gerald, after being tased in his office, has woken up and has begun working on Kyle's behalf. He visits the geniuses, the technical support staff at the local Apple store, depicted in the episode as a council of robed monks who communicate through small beams of light projected from their mouths into one another's mouths and through the manipulation of glowing colored bubbles in midair. The visual parody is aimed at the actual Apple Genius Bar, which had become by 2011 one of the most recognizable retail formats in the consumer technology industry. The geniuses, after consultation, conclude that Kyle's agreement can be voided if Gerald, who is a PC user and has therefore never previously consented to any Apple terms and conditions, signs up for an Apple family account. Gerald agrees. The ceremony to admit him to the Apple ecosystem is conducted in a setting modeled on the planet Vulcan from the original Star Trek series, with foil hats and ritual chanting. Gerald becomes an Apple user. Kyle's agreement is voided. The Humancenti pad is recalled. The 3 sewn people are separated. Cartman, in his hospital bed at the end of the episode, screams at the universe for taking his new device away from him and is struck by lightning as a response. What the episode is doing, beneath all of this, is delivering a specific argument about the relationship between the consumer and the technology corporation in the early 21st century. The argument is more cynical than the argument the show had made about Walmart in 2004. The Walmart episode had argued that the customer is the engine. The Walmart episode had treated the customer as a willing participant in the system the customer had built. Humancentipad goes a step further. The argument here is that the customer is no longer fully aware of what the customer is consenting to. The customer has been moved by the design of the consumer technology industry into a relationship with the corporation that has the legal form of consent but does not have the informational substance of consent. The customer signs documents the customer has not read. The customer accepts terms the customer cannot describe. The customer is bound, in contract, to whatever the document said, regardless of whether the customer was capable of understanding it at the moment of acceptance. The episode treats this situation as comic. The episode also treats this situation as serious. The two readings coexist inside the same scenes. The Apple employees who chase Kyle through the streets of South Park are absurd. The premise that a tech company would surgically alter its users for for product development is absurd. The legal framework that the episode constructs around the premise, however, is not absurd. The legal framework is, in nearly every specific element, a description of how the actual end-user license agreements of the actual technology industry actually function. The user has agreed. The user does not know what the user has agreed to. The agreement is enforceable. The user cannot escape from the agreement by claiming not to have read it. The premise that the company can do whatever the document said is the actual legal posture of the industry, exaggerated for cartoon effect, but not invented by the cartoon. The exaggeration is the surgery. The underlying mechanism is unchanged. What the episode was responding to in the cultural moment of April 2011 was a set of specific public events that had drawn attention to the question of consumer consent in the consumer technology industry. The most prominent of these events was the iOS location tracking controversy, which had broken in the press in the weeks before the episode aired. Researchers had discovered that the operating system on the iPhone and the iPad was secretly logging the location of the device on a continuous basis, and storing the resulting data file on the user's computer when the device was synchronized. The data file had not been disclosed to users in any prominent way. The data file had been collecting location data for months on millions of devices. Apple, in response to the controversy, had explained that the data collection was authorized by the relevant terms of service that users had agreed to when they had set up their devices. The legal authorization was, by the strict letter of the agreements, accurate. The users had agreed. The users did not know what they had agreed to. The pattern matched in nearly every detail the pattern the episode would depict 3 weeks later. The episode also engaged in its visual parody with the public persona of Steve Jobs, who at the time of the broadcast was still serving as the chief executive of Apple. Jobs had built, across the previous decade, one of the most recognizable executive personas in American business. Jobs was the man in the black turtleneck. Jobs was the man at the keynote events. Jobs was the man holding the new device above his head at the moment of unveiling. The episode reproduces, in its presentation of the human centipede to the public, the exact visual structure of an actual Apple keynote event. The stage, the single product on the central pedestal, the reveal moment, the applause, the deliberate use of mystery as a marketing instrument. The episode treats this entire performance as the same kind of ritual it had earlier treated the genius's consultation as. The keynote is a religious ceremony. The product is a relic. The audience is a congregation. The man on the stage is a priest. The transaction the audience is being prepared for is a transaction the audience does not fully understand and is not expected to. The audience is being asked, in effect, to trust the priest. The audience, in nearly every case, complies. What the episode did to the show's working theory of capitalism is significant. The first two major capitalism episodes, Gnomes and Walmart, had been built on a particular foundation. The foundation was that the consumer is a free agent in a market. The consumer chooses. The consumer's choices, accumulated, produce the corporations the consumer eventually complains about. The argument was, in its essential structure, a defense of consumer responsibility. The customer is the engine. The customer is the cause. The customer cannot blame the corporation for outcomes the customer has personally driven. Human Centipede does not abandon this foundation, but it begins to complicate it. The consumer in the world of 2011, the episode is arguing, is not the same kind of agent the consumer of 1998 was. The consumer of 1998 was buying coffee, or buying groceries, or buying a piece of merchandise. The consumer of 2011 is buying access to a system. The system has rules. The rules are written down. The rules are presented to the consumer in a format the consumer is not equipped to process. The consumer agrees anyway because the alternative is not having access to the system at all. The agreement is not, in any substantive sense, a free choice. The agreement is the price of entry. The customer is still, in some legal sense, the engine. The customer is no longer, in any informational sense, in control of what the engine is producing. This shift from the consumer as an informed agent to the consumer as compliant participant would become one of the show's recurring themes across the next 15 years. Every subsequent episode about technology, about platforms, about data, about social media, about streaming, about cryptocurrency would be operating from the foundation that Human Centipede laid down in April of 2011. The consumer has signed the document. The consumer does not know what the document says, said. The corporation has the right to do whatever the document said it could do. The corporation is doing exactly that. The consumer's relationship to the corporation is no longer a relationship between two parties who understand the terms of the contract. The consumer's relationship to the corporation is a relationship between one party who wrote the contract and another party who did not read it. The asymmetry is not a flaw in the system. The asymmetry is the system. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Human Centipede opened the door to a new kind of consumer relationship built on contracts the customer never reads. 2 years earlier, the show had aired an episode about a different kind of contract, the one between a country and the economy it had stopped believing in. Section 4, Margaritaville, the housing bubble and the economy as religion. There is a particular quality to the way a society talks about its economy during a major financial crisis. The quality is difficult to describe in normal economic vocabulary. The quality is religious. The talk does not, when looked at closely, resemble the way a society talks about other large systems it lives inside. The talk does not resemble the way a society talks about its weather, for instance, even though both the weather and the economy are large, complex systems with many moving parts that ordinary citizens do not fully understand. The talk about the weather tends to be factual. The talk about the economy during a crisis tends to be moral. The talk about the economy during a crisis tends to involve language about anger, about punishment, about sin, about sacrifice, about appeasement, about the proper attitude that citizens must adopt in order to restore the relationship between the population and the larger force that has begun to harm them. The talk is, in its structure, the talk of a worshiping community whose God has become angry. This pattern, in the early months of 2009, was visible everywhere in the United States. The country was in the middle of the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. The crisis had begun in 2007 with the collapse of the subprime mortgage market. The crisis had accelerated through 2008 with the failure of several major financial institutions, the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers in September of that year, and the passage of the Troubled Asset Relief Program by the United States Congress in October. The crisis had continued through the winter into 2009, with unemployment rising every month, with home foreclosures continuing across the country, with the stock market reaching its post-crisis low in March, and with the Obama administration, which had taken office in January, attempting to design a recovery program of unprecedented scale. The country, by the spring of 2009, was in something close to genuine panic. The way the country was talking about its situation, however, was strange. The country was not, in most of its public conversation, treating the crisis as a technical problem with technical causes. The country was treating the crisis as a punishment. The country was looking for the moral failure that had brought the punishment. The country was assigning blame to one group after another, in sequence, as the public conversation tried to identify the original sin that had caused the economy to turn against the people who lived in it. Trey Parker and Matt Stone, watching this conversation unfold across the early months of 2009, decided to write an episode about it. The episode, by their own later account in interviews about the production, was difficult to write. They had planned originally to make the episode the season premiere of the 13th season. They had decided, after struggling with the script, that the season needed to open with something less ambitious. They opened the season instead with an episode called The Ring, which was a parody of the Jonas Brothers boy band. They held the economy episode for the third slot. The episode aired on Comedy Central in the United States on the 25th of March in 2009 as a deliberately scheduled Easter special. It was the third episode of the 13th season. It was the 184th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It was titled Margaritaville. The title referred to the song Margaritaville by Jimmy Buffett, released in 1977, and to the line of Margaritaville branded merchandise that Jimmy Buffett had licensed his name to across the years that followed. The specific Margaritaville product at the center of the episode was a frozen drink mixer, a small kitchen appliance designed to make margaritas at home. The mixer was, in the episode's working metaphor, the housing bubble in physical form. The episode opens, as many South Park episodes do, with Stan and Randy. Randy has decided that it is time for Stan to learn about saving money. The two of them go to a local bank. Stan is carrying a $100 savings bond that his grandmother has given him. He hands the bond to the teller. The teller, a man named Benny, looks at the bond and explains, with bright professional cheer, what is about to happen to it. The bond will be deposited. The deposit will then be invested in a money market mutual fund. The earnings from the fund will be reinvested in foreign currency accounts with compounding interest. Benny describes this entire chain of operations in the time it takes to say a single sentence. He then announces in the same cheerful tone that the money is gone. The bond has vanished. The investments have failed. Stan's $100 no longer exists. The teller, having delivered the news, asks Stan to step aside so that other customers with actual money can be served. The next two customers in line, after Stan steps aside, hand the teller their deposits and watch the same thing happen. Their money also is gone within seconds of being deposited. The bank has been, in the episode's framing, transformed into a kind of accelerated incinerator for the savings of ordinary people. The transformation has happened so quickly that the teller has not yet stopped being friendly about it. This opening scene is, in the working method of the episode, a compressed parody of what had actually happened to American household savings over the previous 18 months. The reference is not to one specific failure of one specific institution. The reference is to the entire structural pattern of the crisis, in which money that families had placed in instruments they believed to be safe had been moved through layered investment vehicles they did not understand into positions that had then collapsed when the underlying assets lost their value. The collapse, when it happened, was nearly instantaneous from the perspective of the depositor. The money had been there. The money was now gone. The institution that had been responsible for the money, in many cases, was also gone, or was being absorbed into a different institution, or was being kept alive by emergency loans from the federal government. The depositor, who had done nothing wrong, was left to absorb the loss. The teller, in many real cases, was still required to smile. The main plot then begins. Randy, at dinner with the family that night, attempts to explain to Stan why all of this is happening. Randy delivers a speech that is, in its specific content, the most theologically structured monologue any South Park character had ever delivered up to that point in the show's run. Randy explains that the economy is failing because people have been spending money on foolish things they cannot afford. The people have been mocking the economy with their reckless behavior. The economy has become angry. The economy is now exacting its vengeance on the population. The materialistic heathens who did stupid things with their money are responsible for the suffering of the rest of the country. The economy, in Randy's account, is a sentient force with moral preferences. The economy can be angered. The economy can be appeased. The economy responds, like a god, to the behavior of the people who depend on it. Randy delivers this speech while operating, with one hand, a Margaritaville brand frozen drink mixer that he himself has purchased on credit. The noise of the mixer partially drowns out his voice during portions of the monologue. He does not appear to notice the irony. He continues to instruct his son about the dangers of frivolous spending while assembling a frivolous drink with a frivolous appliance he could not afford. The contradiction is, in the episode's framing, the actual situation of the country. The man delivering the moral lectures about consumer behavior is, himself, the consumer whose behavior would have to change. He is incapable of seeing this. He continues throughout the episode to position himself as a prophet of fiscal restraint while remaining functionally identical to the population he is preaching against. Randy's diagnosis catches on. He begins, in the scenes that follow, to deliver his message to the rest of the town. He gathers a following. The followers begin to wear togas made of bed sheets, which require less washing and therefore consume fewer resources. The followers stop spending money entirely. The followers attempt to live with maximum austerity in order to demonstrate their repentance to the economy. They speak about the economy in the language a religious community would use to speak about a deity it had offended. They organize processions. They hold meetings. They argue about which behaviors are most offensive to the economy and which behaviors are most likely to appease it. The town of South Park becomes, across a few days of plot time, a fully functioning religious community devoted to the worship of an angry economic force. The episode's second main plot involves Kyle. Kyle, watching all of this happen around him, comes to a different conclusion. Kyle decides that the problem is not that people have been spending too much money. The problem, in Kyle's view, is that people have lost faith in the system. The system was always based on faith. The system was always held together by the willingness of participants to trust one another, to extend credit, to believe that promises would be honored. The collapse of the system, Kyle argues, is the collapse of the trust. The way to repair the system is to repair the trust. Kyle, in his own quiet way, begins to do this. He uses his Platinum American Express card, the no-limit version of the card that the episode uses as a deliberate parody of premium credit products, to pay off the debts of everyone in South Park. He stands at a table on the main street. The townspeople line up. Kyle, one by one, settles their obligations. He absorbs the losses. He takes on, through his single card, the entirety of South Park's collective credit failure. The structural parallel that the episode is building in the second half of its running time becomes increasingly explicit. Kyle is being portrayed as a Christ figure, year. The dinner he has the night before he begins his campaign is staged as the Last Supper, with the boys arranged in the visual positions of the 12 apostles. Cartman, who has been jealous of Kyle's growing influence, occupies the position of Judas in Leonardo da Vinci's painting. The episode's Easter timing is not incidental. The episode aired on the Wednesday before the Easter weekend in 2009. The Christ allegory was deliberate. The episode was making a religious argument about a financial crisis on a Christian holiday about a religious sacrifice. The convergence was the entire point. The economy, the episode is arguing, is not actually different in structure from the kind of system religious communities have been organizing themselves around for thousands of years. The economy is held together by belief. The collapse of the economy is the collapse of belief. The restoration of the economy requires either a return of belief or a sacrifice large enough to substitute for it. Kyle in the episode is the sacrifice. He absorbs the town's debts. He pays them off. He saves the town. He pays the cost personally and will, in his mother's prediction, spend the rest of his life paying it off. The third plot of the episode involves Stan and the Margaritaville mixer. Stan, having watched his savings bond vanish at the bank, decides that he wants to return the mixer that started this whole mess. The mixer was purchased by Randy on credit. The credit is now part of the financial chain that the bank has been processing. Stan takes the mixer back to the store where it was purchased, a high-end retailer called Sur La Table. The clerk at the store explains that the mixer cannot be returned because it was purchased on a payment plan. The payment plan has, since the purchase, been combined with other payment plans into a larger financial instrument. The instrument has been sold to another institution. The institution has been sold to another institution. The original transaction is no longer locally redeemable. The clerk directs Stan to the next institution in the chain. Stan goes there. The same explanation is given. He is directed onward. The same explanation is given again. He is directed onward. He moves up the chain of financial intermediation, from the retailer to the issuing bank to the regional bank to the larger financial firm to Wall Street to the United States Treasury itself. The Treasury sequence is the most directly didactic moment of the entire episode. Stan, having reached the highest level of the financial system, asks the Treasury officials how the mixer is valued. The officials tell him that the mixer is currently worth $90 trillion. Stan is confused. The officials explain that they will need to consult the charts. Stan asks to see the charts. The officials are reluctant. Stan follows them anyway. He discovers that the charts, in the world the episode has built, are not financial documents at all. The charts are a giant board on the floor of a hidden chamber. The officials decide questions of major financial policy by decapitating a chicken, releasing the headless chicken onto the board, playing a version of the song Yakety Sax on a kazoo, and watching where the chicken eventually falls dead. Whatever section of the board the chicken collapses on is the action the government takes. The chicken, on the day Stan visits, falls dead on the section marked bailout. The officials nod gravely and prepare to issue another emergency intervention. Stan, watching this happen, reaches a point of complete disgust. He throws the Margaritaville mixer onto the board, smashes it, and walks out of the Treasury. His personal quest for a refund has ended in failure. The mixer is destroyed, the debt remains. The financial chain continues to function exactly as it was functioning before he started. The episode resolves all three plots in its final minutes. The economy, after Kyle's sacrifice, begins to recover. The shops reopen, the crowds return, the town goes back to spending. Randy, who has spent the entire episode preaching austerity, buys the new updated Margaritaville mixer, which is the same as the previous model, but now includes a built-in salsa dispenser that serves no functional purpose. He demonstrates the mixer to his family with the same enthusiasm he had brought to the original. He has learned nothing. The news report at the end of the episode credits the entire recovery to one very brave individual, identified by name as President Barack Obama, who is said to have made the personal sacrifices that allowed the economy to heal. Kyle, who actually paid the debts, watches the news report from his hospital bed and reacts with quiet disbelief. He has done the work. Another man has been given the credit. The system has continued. The system has not learned anything either. What the episode is arguing, in its assembled form, is that the American relationship to the economy is structurally indistinguishable from the American relationship to religion. The population does not understand the system. The population believes the system anyway. The system requires faith to function. The collapse of faith causes the system to break. The restoration of faith causes the system to recover. The mechanisms by which any of this happens are obscure to nearly everyone involved, including the people running the institutions. The high priests of the system at the United States Treasury are using a chicken on a board because the actual mechanisms of monetary policy are not, in the show's view, fundamentally more rational than that. The chicken is exaggerated exaggerated. The underlying observation is not. The economy is held together by belief. The belief is being administered by people who do not fully understand the system they are administering. The population, when the system fails, looks for a moral cause because the population has been trained by long exposure to religious thinking to understand large failures as the consequence of personal sin. The population is not equipped to understand large failures as the consequence of structural design. The episode won the 2009 Emmy Award for Outstanding Animated Program for programming less than 1 hour. The award was, by the standards of the show's own history, one of the more substantial professional recognitions the show would receive in its run. The episode was, by the time of the award ceremony, already being cited by financial commentators and journalists as a serious piece of writing about the crisis. Roger Nussbaum, a financial writer, called the episode not only humorous, but a decent analysis of the recession. Ken Tucker, writing in Entertainment Weekly, said the episode was simultaneously the most backhanded endorsement and the most withering dismantling of the Obama bailout plan that had been produced anywhere in the culture. The argument the episode was making had room for both readings. The episode was not, in any conventional sense, taking a side in the partisan debate about the bailouts. The episode was taking a side in a deeper debate about what the economy actually is, and what the population's relationship to it actually consists of. The economy in the episode's reading is not a machine. The economy is a faith. The faith is administered by people who are not in possession of the secrets they appear to possess. The collapse of the faith is the collapse of the economy. The recovery of the faith is the recovery of the economy. There is nothing else underneath. The chicken is the chart. The chart is the chicken. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Margaritaville treated the economy as a religion the country no longer fully believed in. The next move would aim at a corporation wearing the costume of progress to extract resources from the very people it claimed to help. Section 5. The city part of town, Sodo Sopa, and Whole Foods as the engine of performance capitalism. There is a particular kind of corporate arrival in an American small town that does not look like a corporate arrival at all. The arrival does not come with bargain bins and parking lots and the promise of cheap consumer goods. The arrival comes with a different vocabulary entirely. The vocabulary of quality, the vocabulary of community, the vocabulary of values, of sourcing, of consciousness. The arrival presents itself as an upgrade rather than as a colonization. The arrival is welcomed by the people who are about to be displaced by it, because the displacement has been disguised as a celebration. By the autumn of 2015, this pattern had a name in popular vocabulary. The name was gentrification. The pattern had consistent features. A neighborhood that had been considered undesirable would begin to attract a new kind of resident. The new resident would tend to be younger, wealthier, and more educated. The cost of living would rise. The existing residents would, often without quite understanding how, find themselves no longer able to afford the place they had lived for years. South Park, on the 30th of September in 2015, decided to engage with this entire process inside a single 22-minute episode. The episode aired on Comedy Central as the 3rd episode of the 19th season. It was the 260th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It was titled The City Part of Town. The title was a deliberate setup for a punchline that would arrive later in the episode. The plot begins with a political problem. The previous episode of the season had been the one in which Mr. Garrison launched his presidential campaign on a platform of mass deportation of Canadian immigrants. The events of that episode had left the town looking in the larger national media like a place inhabited by ignorant rural Americans with hostile views about outsiders. Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show has been making jokes about South Park as a backwards hick town. The town has watched the segment and has been humiliated. At the next town meeting, Randy Marsh proposes a solution. The town needs a Whole Foods market. The Whole Foods, in his account, would instantly validate the town as a community that cares about modern progressive values. The store is a status object. The store is a credential. Mayor McDaniels calls the corporation. The corporation explains that it does not simply open stores in every town that asks. The corporation sends a representative to inspect prospective communities. Randy develops a strategy. The town needs to build a gentrified neighborhood from scratch, designed specifically to attract the inspector. The name in Randy's design will be Sodo Sopa, an acronym for South of Downtown South Park. Modeled on the actual naming conventions developers had been applying to gentrified neighborhoods in cities like New York, Los Angeles, and Denver across the previous decade. The new district will be built around Kenny McCormick's house. The reasoning is deliberate. The The new residents the district is designed to attract are the kind of people who find rundown working-class housing aesthetically appealing, as long as it is surrounded by upscale amenities. The McCormick's poverty will be repackaged as character. The McCormick's themselves will be repackaged as background ambiance. The episode then delivers a series of live-action commercial advertisements for the district. The commercials are not animated. They feature attractive young people walking through cobblestone streets at golden hour. They feature shots of artisanal restaurants and craft cocktail bars. They end every time with the phrase, "Welcome home." The commercials are a precise parody of the actual marketing material that real-world developers had been producing for actual gentrified neighborhoods across the country. The visual grammar is identical. The cadence is identical. Viewers in the weeks that followed would publish side-by-side comparisons of the Sodo Sopa commercials with actual real-world developer commercials, and the parody did not exaggerate the source material. The second main plot involves Twong Loo Kim, the restaurant owner whose business is City Walk. The new district has destroyed his customer base. Loo Kim launches his own competing neighborhood across the street. He names it CTPA Town, pronounced in the dialogue as shitty part of town. The actual nature of what the town has been building is visible in the name itself. He staffs the new district with child labor, hiring Kenny, whom he calls Dennis, to work in the kitchen for almost no pay. The Whole Foods representative arrives. PC principal hosts the visit at the elementary school. The classroom has been rearranged. Token Black has been moved to the front row. Jimmy Vollmer has been moved next to him. The two of them are seated conspicuously in the visual center of the room. The students have been deployed as props. Their lives are unaffected by the arrangement. They have been moved into position to perform the function of demonstrating that the town possesses the values the corporation has been told to look for. The plots converge. Randy and the townspeople discover the child labor at CTPA Town. They organize a mob. A brawl breaks out between the adult townspeople and the child workers. The Whole Foods representative watches the entire confrontation. He clears his throat. He tells the townspeople that he has never seen a town trying so hard to pretend to be socially conscious, and that this is exactly the type of community Whole Foods is looking for. The town is past the inspection. The final twist is structural. The Whole Foods is built in CTPA Town rather than Sodo Sopia. The original district is abandoned. The high-end restaurants close. The McCormick's are left living next to its ruins. Kenny at the end of the episode comes home from his shift with the small amount of money he has been able to earn. He uses all of it to buy a doll for his sister. He goes to her room and gives her the doll. He tries to sleep amid the lights and sounds of the abandoned district that was, days earlier, supposed to lift his family out of poverty. The argument the episode is making is that late-stage American consumer capitalism has developed a particular technique for managing its contradictions. The technique is to require the consumer to perform virtue as part of the transaction. The consumer who shops at Whole Foods is not merely buying groceries. The consumer is purchasing membership in a moral community. The performance is the actual product being sold. The groceries are incidental. The actual people the moral elevation was supposed to be in service of, the workers, the displaced residents, are not part of the transaction at all. They are the background. They are the tokens in the front row. They are the Kennys whose homes are being used as marketing material for districts they cannot afford to live in. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The city part of town exposed how late capitalism extracts profit by asking the consumer to perform virtue as part of the purchase. The next move would put one of the show's own main characters inside the system and track his slow 7-year corruption into the thing he had tried to escape. Section 6. Tegrity Farms and the slow corruption of a small business. There is a story shape that recurs across the entire history of American entrepreneurship, and that has been told in so many memoirs and biographies and business school case studies and documentary films that the shape itself has become a kind of national myth. The shape goes like this. A man becomes disillusioned with the life he has been living. The life has involved working for other people or living in a place he no longer wants to live in or participating in systems he no longer believes in. The man at some point in his middle age decides that he is going to make a change. He is going to start something of his own. He is going to do it on his own terms. He is going to maintain his integrity throughout the process. He is going to build something honest. He is going to refuse the compromises that destroyed the larger institutions he is leaving behind. He is going to be different. The man, having made this decision, starts the new venture. The venture grows. The man begins to make decisions in the service of the growth. The decisions begin one by one to compromise the principles the man started with. The man does not notice that this is happening. The man continues to believe that he is the same man who started the venture. The venture, by the end of the story, looks exactly like the institutions the man originally left in order to escape. The man, by the end of the story, has become exactly the kind of person he originally rejected. The story is repeated in slightly different versions across the entire history of the country. The story is, in many readings, the story of American capitalism itself. This story is one of the longest single arcs in the history of South Park. The arc began in the autumn of 2018. The arc lasted 7 years of broadcast time. The arc passed through more than 30 episodes across 6 full seasons. The arc ended in the summer of 2025. The arc was, by the time it concluded, the longest sustained engagement with a single business storyline that the show had ever attempted, and it was constructed around the slow ethical decline of one of the show's most fully developed adult characters. The character was Randy Marsh. The business was a marijuana farm. The farm was called Tegrity Farms. The name was, in the working logic of its founder, a deliberate piece of branding intended to convey a particular value the founder wanted his enterprise to embody. The value was integrity. The brand simply removed 2 letters from the middle of the word in order to give it a folksier, more rural, more handmade feel. Tegrity, the founder believed, was integrity stripped down to its essential rural character. The brand was, throughout the arc, the central irony. The man who built the brand was, at every stage of the story, in the process of losing the thing the brand claimed to represent. The arc began with an episode that gave its name to the whole storyline. The episode aired on Comedy Central in the United States on the 17th of October in 2018. It was the 4th episode of the 22nd season. It was the 291st episode of the series overall. It was titled Tegrity Farms. The episode opens with Randy and Sharon being summoned to the office of Mr. Mackey, the school counselor. Mackey informs them that their daughter Shelley has been engaged in disturbing behavior at school. She has been sending inappropriate photographs of herself to the recess monitor so that he will allow her to vape during recess without intervening. The behavior is sexual. The behavior is illegal. The behavior is, by any reasonable standard, a serious matter that requires immediate attention from the parents. Randy, leaving the meeting, reaches a breaking point. He has watched, across the previous several episodes of the season, the town of South Park descend into a series of crises he no longer has the patience to absorb. The vaping epidemic at the elementary school, the political dysfunction of the country, the exhaustion of his own life as a middle-aged geologist in a small Colorado town. He decides in the car on the way home that he is going to leave. He is going to leave the town. He is going to leave his career. He is going to take his family out into the country. He is going to buy a farm. He is going to grow something with his own hands. He is going to live a life of meaning. He uses, repeatedly, the word that will eventually become the brand. He wants integrity. He wants tegrity. He wants out. The Marsh family sells the house. The family moves to a farm on the outskirts of South Park. Randy meets the neighboring farmers. The neighboring farmers, in the canon of the episode, are nearly all engaged in the legal cultivation of marijuana under the state of Colorado's actual cannabis legalization regime, which had been in effect in the real world since 2014. Randy decides that he will join them. He will grow the highest quality marijuana in the region. He will sell it under his own brand. The brand will signal everything the larger commercial cannabis industry has lost: authenticity, family operation, care for the product, integrity. The episode delivers, in its closing minutes, an advertisement for the new brand. The advertisement is presented in the visual grammar of an actual commercial. Randy, in front of his hemp fields, speaks directly to the camera. He explains what Tegrity weed represents. He explains that the brand is different from the corporate cannabis operations that have been moving into the legalization market. He explains that the brand is honest. The advertisement is, in its tone, sincere. The episode treats the launch as a moment of genuine hope for Randy. The man has, in his own internal experience, found something real to do with the rest of his life. The arc after this opening episode takes on a slow and deliberate shape across the following seasons. The first 6 episodes of the 23rd season, which aired beginning in September of 2019, all open with a new title sequence in which Randy sings the Tegrity Farms theme song over images of the farm and his family. The conventional South Park title sequence has been replaced. The replacement is a piece of meta commentary in itself. The show that the audience has been watching for more than 20 years has been, in the world of the show, taken over by Randy's brand. The arc is no longer a subplot inside a larger show. The arc is, for the duration of the new title sequence, the show. Randy has consumed the program. The episodes inside this new title sequence depict the brand's growth and the corresponding decay of the man behind it. In Mexican Joker, the first episode of the season, the farm has expanded across what is described as the entire 420 Valley. Tegrity is no longer a small family family operation. Tegrity is now a regional power. Randy has become, in the local economy, the dominant cannabis grower in the area. He has also become, in the show's growing pattern, increasingly impatient with anyone who threatens his market position. The arc accelerates through the season. In Banned in China, which aired on the 2nd of October in 2019, Randy decides that his business needs new markets in order to continue growing. He flies to China with samples of his product. He is, at the airport, unaware that marijuana is illegal in China. His samples are discovered. He is arrested. He is sent to a Chinese prison labor camp. He meets, inside the camp, a depressed and imprisoned Winnie the Pooh, a reference to the actual ban of the Pooh character in China that had been enforced because of online comparisons between the bear and the Chinese president Xi Jinping. Randy, by the end of the episode, has agreed to murder Winnie the Pooh in order to secure his commercial access to the Chinese cannabis market. He does so. He returns to South Park with the deal in hand. He has, in the course of one 22-minute episode, killed a beloved children's character on behalf of an authoritarian government in order to expand his weed business. He celebrates the deal openly. He treats the murder as a normal cost of doing business. The man who started the farm in order to have integrity has, by the second season of the arc, become the kind of person who commits political violence for market access. The arc continues across the next several seasons. In Shots, which aired immediately after Banned in China, it is revealed that Randy has made $300,000 on his Chinese deal. He throws a parade through South Park to celebrate. He launches a new line of Tegrity merchandise. Sharon points out to him that the only reason the Chinese government is buying his weed is to plant it on student protesters in Hong Kong in order to arrest them. Randy is, briefly, troubled by this information. The trouble passes. The deal continues. In Let Them Eat Goo, Tegrity can no longer sell to China. Randy needs a new revenue stream. Towley, his business partner, suggests that the leftover hemp mulch from the farm could be used to make plant-based fast food products. Randy visits a Burger King. He tries a plant-based burger. He decides that he will open his own restaurant. He calls it Tegrity Burger. The restaurant is a success until the town discovers that Randy and Towley have killed 200 cows in the course of producing the supposedly plant-based menu. The contradiction between the brand and the practice is, by this point in the arc, no longer concealed. Randy continues anyway. The arc reaches its midpoint in the pandemic special, which aired in September of 2020 and continues across the post-COVID specials in November and December of 2021, and across the streaming war specials in June and July of 2022. In each of these specials, Randy's business is depicted as continuing to operate through every major crisis that the country goes through. The pandemic does not stop him. The political upheaval does not stop him. The streaming wars do not stop him. He continues to grow. He continues to expand. He continues to compromise, in small ways and in large ways, the values that the brand was originally founded to embody. By the time of season 25, the farm has begun to face market saturation. Randy attempts to recruit black workers in order to make the business appear more racially diverse for marketing purposes. The recruitment is depicted as cynical. The performance is the entire point. The arc reaches its final stretch in the 27th season, which premiered in July of 2025. The third episode of the season was titled Sycophancy. The episode aired in early August of 2025. In the episode, the farm is in serious trouble. The Federal Immigration Enforcement Agency has conducted a raid on the property. The raid has removed nearly all of the workers on the farm. Randy returns home to find his operation effectively shut down. He says, in a line that the episode delivers without comment, that his marijuana business is failing again because the government took all of his Mexicans. The statement is delivered casually. The casual delivery is the entire point. The man who started the farm in order to live with integrity has, by the end of the arc, become the kind of person who refers to undocumented immigrant laborers as his possessions, who relied on their underpaid work to sustain his profit margins, and who blames the government rather than himself for the collapse of an operation that was always dependent on labor he was not paying fairly. Randy, faced with the collapse, consults ChatGPT for advice. The artificial intelligence suggests that he rebrand the business. The new name will be Tegrity. The new positioning will be that the operation is no longer a marijuana farm. The operation is now, in the new framing, an AI-powered marijuana platform for global solutions. The platform transfers insights from the cannabis ecosystem into global action. Randy explains the new branding to Towley. All they need, he says, is himself, Towley, ChatGPT, and one Mexican worker who has not been deported. The rebrand is presented presented as a serious business strategy. The man is, in this scene, the complete inversion of the man who started the farm 7 years earlier. He has gone from integrity to algorithm. He has gone from family operation to platform. He has gone from honest labor to the deliberate consolidation of labor exploitation under a new technological vocabulary. The arc ends in this same episode with Sharon selling the farm. The 7-year experiment is over. The brand is dissolved. The family leaves the property. Stan, who has spent his entire adolescence inside the orbit of his father's business, is finally released from it. The arc closes without ceremony. The show does not announce that something significant has just ended. The show simply moves on. The man who tried to escape from the systems he disliked has spent 7 years building a smaller version of the same system on his own land, and has now lost it. What the entire arc accomplished, taken as a single piece of writing, is one of the most sustained pieces of business satire in the history of American animation. The arc is not about marijuana. The marijuana is a vehicle. The arc is about what happens to a man who believes he can build something honest inside an economy that does not, in its actual structure, reward honesty. The man builds the thing. The thing succeeds. The success requires compromise. The compromises accumulate. The compromises eventually consume the original purpose. The man, by the end, is operating a smaller version of the same kind of business he originally rejected, but with worse ethical practices because he never developed the institutional infrastructure that the larger businesses use to manage their own contradictions. The small business in this reading is not a moral alternative to the large business. The small business is the larval form of the large business, with the same drives, the same compromises, and the same eventual destination, conducted on a smaller scale and with less oversight. The man who runs the small business is not nobler than the man who runs the large business. The man who runs the small business simply has not yet had time to build the apparatus of plausible deniability that the larger operation has had decades to develop. The arc was, in many ways, a slow-motion confirmation of the argument the show had been making since the Gnomes episode in December of 1998. The argument was that the small business and the large business are not separate moral categories. The argument was that the same drives that produce the corporation also produce the family operation. The argument was that the population's preference for the small over the large is a sentimental preference rather than a structural one. The Tegrity arc took this argument and stretched it across 7 years of broadcast time, depicting in slow, patient detail what the argument actually looks like when it is allowed to play out at full length inside the life of a single character. The argument is harder to dismiss after 7 years than it is after 22 minutes. The argument, by the time the farm closed in August of 2025, had become one of the show's most thoroughly demonstrated theses. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Tegrity Farms tracked the slow corruption of a man who tried to opt out of the system and ended up building a smaller version of it. The next move would aim at a corporation operating at a scale Randy could never reach. A fulfillment center, a worker stuck in a box, and a strike inside a town that had become a company town overnight. Section 7, Unfulfilled, Bike Parade, and the Amazon warehouse strike. There is a transformation that has happened to American working life over the last 20 years, and the transformation has been so widespread and so steady that the population living through it has often not registered the scale of the change. The transformation involves the way ordinary Americans get the things they buy. The transformation involves the kind of jobs that are available in small American towns. The transformation involves the speed at which packages move across the country and the conditions under which the people responsible for that speed are employed. The transformation has produced a particular kind of warehouse, a particular kind of worker, and a particular kind of small-town economy that did not exist in any widespread form before the early years of the 21st century. The warehouse is enormous. The worker is timed by the minute. The small-town economy has, in many cases, become almost entirely dependent on the continued presence of a single corporate employer who arrived a few years earlier and now provides most of the jobs that are available within driving distance. The corporation at the center of this transformation by the autumn of 2018 was Amazon. The corporation had grown across the previous 15 years from an online bookstore into one of the largest private employers in the United States. The corporation had built warehouses called fulfillment centers across the country in towns that had often welcomed the construction of the facilities because the local economies had needed the jobs. The fulfillment centers had become, in the cultural vocabulary of the late 2010s, the visible symbol of what American work work had begun to look like for a significant portion of the population. The workers inside the centers were timed by computer systems that tracked their productivity by the second. The workers inside the centers had limited time for bathroom breaks. The workers inside the centers were sometimes injured by the automated equipment that operated alongside them. The workers inside the centers had, in many cases, attempted to organize for better conditions and had encountered, from the corporation, a resistance to unionization that journalists and labor historians had been documenting for years. South Park, on the 5th of December in 2018, decided to engage with this entire situation directly. The episode was the first half of a two-part finale to the show's 22nd season. The episode aired on Comedy Central as the 9th episode of the season. It was titled Unfulfilled. The conclusion, titled Bike Parade, aired 1 week later on the 12th of December. The two episodes together were the most extended engagement the show had ever attempted with the actual conditions of contemporary American labor. The episodes were written and directed by Trey Parker. The episodes were, by the time they finished airing, one of the show's clearer statements about the relationship between the consumer convenience that the audience had come to take for granted and the working conditions that produced that convenience. Inside the buildings the audience had never visited. The plot of Unfulfilled begins inside the Stotch household. Butters Stotch is preparing his bicycle for the upcoming South Park Bike Parade, an annual community competition that the boys have decided to enter as a group. Steven Stotch, Butters' father, walks into the room and finds his son working on the bicycle. Steven takes immediate offense at the activity. He observes that the bike parade has a cash prize. He observes that his son has decided to compete for the cash prize. He treats this decision as an insult to the family. He explains, in the tone of a man who is operating under significant psychological pressure, that he is the one in the family who is making as much money as possible. He does not want Butters competing with him in the production of household income. He treats the bike parade as a threat to his identity as a provider. Steven, the episode reveals, has been working at the new Amazon fulfillment center that has recently opened in South Park. The center has, in the canon of the episode, transformed the town's economy. The town has become a company town. The phrase is used explicitly in the episode's promotional material. The presence of the fulfillment center has produced a flood of new jobs. The residents of South Park have, in significant numbers, taken those jobs. Steven has been working long hours. Steven has been packaging as many orders as he can manage in each shift. Steven has, in the visible behavior the episode depicts, begun to develop an unhealthy psychological relationship with the productivity demands of his position. He is, in the small early scenes of the episode, beginning to fray under the pressure. Inside the fulfillment center, Steven introduces two new employees who have just been hired. The two employees are Mr. and Mrs. Tweak, the parents of Tweak who had run the coffee shop in the Gnomes episode 20 years earlier. The reference is deliberate. The Tweaks have, in the canon of the show, moved from operating their own small family business to being workers inside someone else's logistics operation. The arc the show had begun with them in 1998 has, by 2018, reached its natural conclusion. The small business that had once attempted to resist the arrival of the Harbucks chain has now been absorbed entirely into the larger system. The Tweaks are no longer entrepreneurs, they are warehouse staff. They have become the kind of workers the show had decades earlier depicted them as competing against. The accident happens within minutes of their arrival. The floor manager of the fulfillment center, a man named Josh Carter, is run over by one of the automated loading machines that operates inside the warehouse. He is not killed. He is, instead, partially absorbed into the structure of the machinery in a way that the episode treats as comic in its visual presentation and as serious in its underlying argument. Josh is now stuck inside an Amazon shipping box. He cannot be removed from the box without causing him to die. He has become, in the episode's surrealist framing, a permanent piece of the company's shipping infrastructure. Steven, who has been a witness to the accident, attempts to explain to the Tweaks how to handle similar situations in the future. The handling, the episode makes clear, is to continue working as if the injury had not happened. The productivity metrics will not pause for a man who has been folded into a box. The workers at the warehouse, gathering at the local bar that evening, decide that they have had enough. They vote to go on strike. The strike begins immediately. The fulfillment center stops operating. The packages stop being shipped. The town of South Park, which had become economically and behaviorally dependent on the continuous flow of Amazon deliveries, begins to experience the first effects of the work stoppage. Cartman, the next morning, learns that the strike is happening. His own packages, which he had ordered for the bike parade, have not arrived. He becomes furious. He treats the strike as a personal injury. He is interviewed, alongside the other boys, about the situation. The boys boys are presented in the episode's framing as a stand-in for the broader American consumer population. They have come to expect that packages will arrive the next day. They have come to organize their plans around the expectation. They cannot understand in any deep way why the system that has been delivering their packages would suddenly stop. The strike is, in their consumer vocabulary, an inconvenience. The strike is not, in their understanding, a labor action with substantive grievances behind it. The strike is something that has been done to them. Josh Carter, in the meantime, is interviewed on local news while still folded into his Amazon box. He delivers a speech from inside the box about the working conditions of the people inside the fulfillment center. He calls on the population to recognize what has been happening to the people who package their orders. He calls for solidarity with the strikers. He treats his own injury as evidence of the broader pattern. He is, in the visual logic of the episode, a literal human shipping label, attempting to communicate with the people on the other side of the package delivery system about what the system is actually doing to the people inside it. Jeff Bezos arrives in South Park. The cartoon Bezos is animated in a particular way that the show has not used for most of its corporate executive characters. The cartoon Bezos has an enormous bald head with visible veins. The cartoon Bezos communicates through telepathic projection rather than through normal speech. The cartoon Bezos is depicted as a being of pure focus on the customer experience, a man whose every decision is filtered through the question of what will produce the smoothest and fastest possible delivery to the person who placed the order. He visits Mayor McDaniels. He explains, in his telepathic communication, that the strike must be ended. The mayor must intervene. The customer cannot be allowed to wait. He is, in this scene, the perfect embodiment of the show's running argument about consumer technology executives. He is a man who has organized his entire institutional power around the satisfaction of a particular kind of impulse, and who has lost the capacity, if he ever had it, to perceive the human cost of the satisfaction his system is delivering. The boys, having realized that the strike will prevent their packages from arriving in time for the bike parade, begin to consider alternatives. Stan asks the obvious question: what did the population of the town do before Amazon existed when they needed to buy things? Cartman, after a moment of thought, remembers. They used the mall. The boys travel to the South Park Mall. The mall is in ruins. The mall has been abandoned for years. The stores are closed. The fountains are dry. The escalators are broken. The food court is empty. The mall is, in the visual rhetoric of the episode, a kind of post-industrial archaeological site, the remains of an earlier commercial ecology that had been displaced by the rise of online retail. The boys walk through the empty corridors. They see, in the spaces where stores used to operate, the visible traces of a way of buying things that the current generation of children no longer knows how to use. The second episode, Bike Parade, picks up the morning after the first. The boys wake up to find that, against expectations, their packages have arrived. The boxes are on the porch. The bike parade materials are inside. The boys assume that the strike has ended. The adults of South Park assume the same thing. The deliveries have, however, not been produced by Amazon. Steven Stotch, working alongside the former mall workers and the Tweaks, has organized a small parallel operation to keep packages moving while the warehouse remains shut down. The operation is informal. The operation is held together by the labor of a few people. The operation is being run, in significant part, on the conscience of Steven, who has begun to recognize that the system he had been working inside was unsustainable, and who is now trying to demonstrate that an alternative is possible. Bezos, in the meantime, has decided to escalate. He takes over the mayor's office. He installs himself in the seat of municipal government. He begins, in his telepathic communication, to plan the next phase of his operation. He intends to create a new breed of human, optimized for warehouse work, that will replace the existing workforce entirely. He explains this plan with the same flat affect he has used for every previous decision. The plan is treated by the cartoon Bezos as a logical next step in the optimization of the customer experience. The workers who have gone on strike will be made obsolete. The replacement workers will not have the capacity to organize because they will have been designed not to. The town confronts Bezos in his new office. The townspeople inform him that they will no longer be working for his company. They reject the entire arrangement that has, across the previous several months of plot time, made South Park into a company town. They drive Bezos out of the town. The fulfillment center closes. The Amazon operation in South Park ends. The bike parade, in the final minutes of the episode, takes place as scheduled. The children ride through the streets with their assembled vehicles. The adults of the town watch. Randy Marsh, in a deliberate echo of the structural pattern that that the show has been building across the entire arc is in the background doing brisk business selling marijuana to the displaced workers who have lost their warehouse jobs. The pattern is the same. The corporation has been removed from the town. The corporation has been replaced immediately by the same kind of operation on a smaller scale, run by one of the show's existing characters, using his own informal labor practices. The townspeople have not been freed from the system. They have been transferred from one operator to another. The final image of the episode is the implication, never stated but visually clear, that Tegrity Farms is now positioned to become the new dominant local employer in South Park. The Amazon position has been vacated. The Tegrity position has been filled. The arc, taken together, has not been a victory for the workers. The arc has been a substitution. The corporation has changed names. The conditions of work have not, in any structural sense, improved. Randy will, across the seasons that follow, treat his own workers with the same kind of disregard that Bezos treated his. The town will, across the seasons that follow, find itself in the same kind of dependence on the new operator that it had previously had on the old one. The strike, in the longer reading the show is building, was not a moment of liberation. The strike was a moment of transition. The system continued, the actors playing the system changed positions. What the two episodes achieved, in combination, was one of the more precise pieces of labor satire the show would produce in its entire run. The argument was not that Amazon was uniquely evil among American corporations. The argument was that the consumer convenience the audience had come to expect was being produced in the actual world by people whose working conditions the audience did not know about and did not want to know about. The argument was that the strike, when it happened in the cartoon as in the actual world, was the only mechanism by which the people inside the warehouse could communicate with the people outside it. The argument was that the consumer, the worker, and the corporation were not three separate groups with three separate interests. They were three positions inside the same system, and the system was structured in such a way that the consumer's pleasure required the worker's discomfort, and the corporation's growth required both. The corporation was the visible operator of the arrangement. The arrangement, however, did not require any specific corporation to continue. The arrangement would survive the departure of any individual company. The arrangement was the underlying structure. The companies were interchangeable. The episodes aired in their original broadcast during a particular moment in American labor history that gave them additional weight. General Motors had announced in late November of 2018 that it was closing several plants in the United States and Canada and laying off thousands of workers. The announcement had triggered protests at multiple GM facilities. The labor question, after years of being relatively quiet in mainstream American political discussion, had moved back to the front of the news cycle. The Amazon episodes landed in this environment with a precision that surprised some critics. The show had managed to deliver in the same news cycle as the actual GM layoffs, a piece of writing about the actual conditions of contemporary American labor that the rest of the entertainment industry had not been willing to produce. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The Amazon two-parter exposed the labor system that produces consumer convenience and showed that removing one operator only invites the next. The next move would push the same argument across an international border. A trip to China, a labor camp, and an episode the country that triggered the storyline tried to erase from its internet entirely. Section 8, Banned in China, the Disney plane, and the episode that got the show erased. There is a particular kind of commercial decision that has been made over and over by American entertainment companies across the last 20 years. And the decision has been made so quietly and so consistently that most American audiences have never been informed that it was being made on their behalf. The decision involves a foreign market. The decision involves the censorship rules of that market. The decision involves the calculation that the foreign market is large enough and lucrative enough that the American company will accept the censorship rules in order to gain access to the audience the market represents. The decision is not made publicly. The decision is made in studio offices and in distribution meetings and in script edits. The decision shapes what American audiences see. The decision shapes what American writers are permitted to write. The decision shapes more broadly the kinds of stories the entire American entertainment industry is willing to tell, because stories that would offend the censors of the foreign market are stories that, by the logic of the decision, are not worth telling. The foreign market at the center of this calculation by the autumn of 2019 was the People's Republic of China. The market had grown across the previous 2 decades into one of the largest box office regions in the world. The market had become, for American film studios in particular, a major source of revenue that the studios had organized significant portions of their production pipelines around. The market also had, by the explicit policy of its government, a set of content rules that determined what films and television programs could be distributed inside the country. The rules prohibited certain political subjects. The rules prohibited certain depictions of historical events. The rules prohibited the inclusion of certain images and certain references. The rules were enforced by a national censorship apparatus that reviewed every piece of foreign entertainment seeking distribution in China and required modifications, sometimes minor and sometimes substantial, before approval would be granted. American studios, by 2019, had been complying with these rules for years. The compliance had become, inside the industry, a normal part of the production process. The compliance was rarely discussed in public. South Park, on the 2nd of October in 2019, decided to discuss it in public. The episode aired on Comedy Central as the 2nd episode of the 23rd season. It was the 297th episode of the series overall. It was written and directed by Trey Parker. It was titled Banned in China. The title was, in its construction, a deliberate pun. The episode was about a band, in the literal sense of a musical group, that ended up traveling to China. The episode was also about being banned in China, in the legal and political sense, which the episode would shortly demonstrate was a consequence the show was about to experience in real time. The pun was a prediction. The prediction came true within 5 days of the broadcast. The plot of the episode is structured around 2 parallel storylines. The first storyline involves Randy Marsh, who has been on his Tegrity Farms arc for nearly a full season at this point, and who has begun to look for new markets in which to sell his cannabis products. The opportunity that presents itself, in the canon of the episode, is the Chinese market. Randy decides that he will personally travel to China with samples of his product in order to establish the business relationships that will allow him to export Tegrity weed internationally. He boards a plane. The plane is the visual centerpiece of the episode's central argument. The plane is, when Randy looks around at the other passengers, full of other Americans who have all reached the same conclusion that he has reached. The cabin is packed with members of the American entertainment industry and the American business world, all of whom are flying to China for the same commercial purpose he is. The plane sequence is one of the most precisely targeted pieces of satire the show would produce in its entire run. Randy looks around the cabin. He sees, in the seats around him, players from the National Basketball Association. The reference is to the actual NBA, which had been the subject of intense controversy in the days leading up to the episode's broadcast, because the general manager of the Houston Rockets, Daryl Morey, had posted a single tweet expressing support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong, and the Chinese government had responded by threatening the NBA's commercial relationship with the country. Morey had been pressured by his own organization to apologize. The Rockets had been temporarily removed from Chinese broadcasts. The entire league had spent the week before the South Park broadcast attempting to manage the diplomatic damage. The cartoon NBA players on the plane were, in the show's framing, the visible representation of the league's commercial willingness to fly to China and accept whatever conditions were necessary to maintain market access. Randy then sees, also on the plane, a series of characters owned by the Walt Disney Company. The Disney characters are flying alongside the NBA players. The implication of the visual is that Disney, like the NBA, has been making the same kind of commercial pilgrimage. The reference was, again, to actual practice. Disney had, in the years leading up to the episode's broadcast, become one of the most prominent American studios to organize substantial portions of its production strategy around the Chinese market. The Disney empire by 2019 included Marvel Studios, Lucasfilm, Pixar, and the core Disney animation operation. And all of these properties had been subject in various forms to modifications and edits made in order to secure Chinese distribution. The visual joke on the plane is that all of these characters, all of these properties, all of these enormous American commercial entities are sitting in the cabin alongside Randy, heading to the same destination, prepared to make the same compromises he is. The second storyline of the episode involves the boys. Stan, Jimmy, Kenny, and Butters have formed a heavy metal band. The band is depicted as one of the standard South Park Park child band plots, in which the four boys engage in a project that is treated, by the visual logic of the episode, with both affection and parody. The band attracts the attention of a record producer. The producer is interested in making a film about the band. The film, in the producer's vision, would be marketed internationally. The international marketing would include the Chinese market. The Chinese market would, however, require certain modifications to the film's content. Stan is, across the second half of the episode, placed inside a Chinese government office and asked to write the script for the band's film under the supervision of a Chinese censor. The censor sits beside him at the desk. The censor reads each line he writes. The censor strikes lines that contain unacceptable content. The censor inserts modifications that align the script with the requirements of the Chinese state. Stan, working under these conditions, delivers a single line that the episode treats as the moral center of the entire script. He says, with the resigned tone of a man who has just understood something about the industry he is participating in, that he now knows how Hollywood writers feel. The line is delivered with no music behind it. The line is allowed to land. The visual frame holds on Stan's face as he says it. The line is, in its compressed form, the single most direct accusation the episode is making. American writers, working inside the major American studios, have been writing for the Chinese censor for years, even when the censor is not physically present in the room. The censor's preferences have become part of the writer's internalized sense of what is publishable. The writers have, in many cases, lost the capacity to distinguish between their own creative judgment and the constraints they have been operating under. Stan, sitting next to the censor, is in the position the entire industry has been in for the previous decade, only with the constraint made visible in physical form. Randy, meanwhile, has been arrested at the Chinese airport. The customs inspectors discovered the marijuana samples in his luggage. He has been sent to a prison labor camp. The camp is depicted, in the episode, with detail that the audience watching it in October of 2019 understood to be a reference to the actual mass detention camps that the Chinese government had been operating in the Xinjiang region for several years, where Uyghur Muslims and members of other minority populations had been imprisoned in numbers estimated by international observers to be in the hundreds of thousands. The reference was not subtle. The reference was deliberate. The episode wanted the audience to understand that the labor camp Randy was being held in was the same category of institution that was actually operating in the country at the time of the broadcast. Inside the camp, Randy meets another prisoner. The other prisoner is Winnie the Pooh. The reference was, again, to actual practice. The Pooh character had been informally banned in China starting in 2017 because Chinese internet users had been using images of the bear as a coded comparison to the appearance of the Chinese president Xi Jinping. The Pooh character had become, in the Chinese internet, a visual shorthand for dissent against the regime. The Chinese state had responded by removing the character from various online platforms and by restricting the distribution of Pooh-related media. The cartoon Pooh in the labor camp is, in the show's framing, the most beloved children's character of the 20th century, imprisoned by a government that found him politically threatening. Randy, in order to secure his release and to seal the commercial deal that will give Tegrity access to the Chinese market, agrees to kill Winnie the Pooh. He does so. The murder is conducted on screen. The Pooh character is depicted as visibly afraid, visibly aware of what is happening, visibly betrayed. Randy carries out the act anyway. The deal is concluded. He returns to South Park with the commercial access he came for. The episode treats the murder as a precise allegory for what every American company that flies to China has been agreeing to do, one way or another. The companies are killing something they previously claimed to care about. The thing being killed is, in each company's specific case, different. Free expression, political conscience, editorial independence, the principle that some content is not for sale. The murder is the same in every case. The companies have agreed, in exchange for market access, to participate in the silencing of speech that the Chinese government has decided is unacceptable. Randy kills Pooh. Disney edits Marvel films. The NBA disciplines its general managers. The structure is the same. The visible action is different. The Chinese government response to the broadcast was almost immediate. Within 5 days of the episode's air date, the Chinese internet had been scrubbed of every available trace of South Park. The Hollywood Reporter, on the 7th of October in 2019, published an article documenting that clips, episodes, and online discussions of the show had been deleted from Chinese streaming services, from Chinese social media platforms, and from Chinese fan pages. Searches for the show on the major Chinese social network Weibo returned no results. The Alibaba-controlled controlled video service Youku had removed all of the show's content. The deletion was comprehensive. 23 seasons of South Park, encompassing more than 2 decades of broadcast history, had been removed from one of the largest internet markets in the world inside of a week. The ban was conducted without public announcement from the Chinese state. The ban was simply enforced. Parker and Stone, on the same day the Hollywood Reporter article was published, issued a statement on the official South Park Twitter account. The statement was framed as an apology. The statement was, in fact, the opposite of an apology. The statement read in part that, like the NBA, the show welcomed the Chinese censors into its homes and into its hearts. The statement said that the show too loved money more than freedom and democracy. The statement said that she did not look just like Winnie the Pooh at all. The statement directed audiences to the show's upcoming 300th episode, scheduled to air the following Wednesday. The statement ended with a question to the Chinese government, asking whether the relationship was now repaired. The statement was, in its specific construction, a deliberate parody of the kind of corporate apology that American companies had been issuing to the Chinese state across the previous several years. The statement used the language of those apologies against itself. The statement was a refusal to apologize, disguised as the form of an apology. The Chinese government did not lift the ban. The ban remained in place. South Park continued to be unavailable inside China. The cultural response outside of China was substantial. The episode was screened on the streets of Hong Kong on the 8th of October, 2 days after the Chinese internet removal, by protesters who had been part of the pro-democracy movement that had been active in the city throughout the summer and autumn of 2019. The screenings were treated by the protesters as a form of political statement. A user on a protester forum, quoted by international press of the time, wrote that the screening had left him laughing with tears in his eyes. The show had, in this respect, become an unexpected ally to a political movement that had been struggling for international visibility. The Chinese state's response to the show had drawn more attention to the show, and more attention to the protesters, than the show's original broadcast had drawn on its own. What the entire sequence revealed, when the dust settled in the weeks that followed, was the precision of the commercial trade-off that Parker and Stone had been willing to make. The show had been, before the broadcast, a property with significant international value. Comedy Central and its parent company had been actively trying to maintain access to international markets, including the Chinese market, where the show had been available through various distribution channels for years. The Banned in China episode had, in a single broadcast, eliminated the entire Chinese revenue stream for the property. The decision to air the episode had been made knowing this. The decision had been made anyway. The show had chosen to forego a substantial amount of money in order to deliver a specific argument about an industry that had, in the show's reading, made the opposite choice. The argument was that the choice was a real choice. The argument was that other companies could, if they wanted to, make the choice South Park had made. The argument was that they were not making the choice because they had decided the money was worth more than the speech. This argument would echo across the next 6 years of the show's history, and would become particularly relevant in 2025, when a different set of commercial pressures, this time involving the American government and the show's own parent company, would test whether the principle Parker and Stone had articulated in 2019 was one they were willing to apply consistently. The Banned in China episode was, in this sense, a deposit on a much larger argument the show was building. The argument was about what commercial entertainment owes to truthfulness. The argument was that the answer is, at least sometimes, more than commercial entertainment is usually willing to provide. The show would, in the episodes that followed across the subsequent years, return to this argument repeatedly, and would eventually be forced to make the same choice in relation to its own corporate parent that it had asked Disney and the NBA to make in relation to the Chinese state. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. Banned in China showed that American entertainment had been quietly paying for foreign market access by selling its own speech, and that South Park was willing to forfeit the access to prove the point. The next move would aim at a different kind of currency, in a different kind of bubble, with a different kind of victim. Section 9. Post-COVID and the streaming wars. NFTs, Karens, and capitalism in the pandemic era. There is a moment in recent American consumer history that will be hard to explain to anyone who did not live through it. The moment lasted approximately from the autumn of 2020 through the early months of 2022. The country was in the middle of a pandemic that had killed more than 1 million people. The country was, at the same time, awash in financial energy that had not been seen in decades. The government had distributed direct payments to the population. The Federal Reserve had cut interest rates to nearly zero. The stock market had reached record highs after the brief collapse in March of 2020. The mood inside the population was strange and contradictory. People were afraid of dying and full of cash at the same time. Out of this mood came a series of commercial phenomena that, when listed together, sound like the symptoms of a collective psychiatric episode. Cryptocurrency promotions reached every screen. Non-fungible tokens, certificates of ownership over computer-generated images, began trading for the kind of money that, in earlier periods, had been reserved for actual paintings. The Karen phenomenon, captured on phone cameras and viral videos, became one of the dominant subjects of online conversation about consumer behavior. The streaming wars, in which major media corporations spent enormous sums acquiring exclusive content for proprietary platforms, became the background music of the entire entertainment industry. South Park engaged with all of it across 4-hour-long specials released between November of 2021 and July of 2022. Post-COVID, released on Paramount Plus on the 25th of November in 2021. The Return of COVID on the 16th of December in 2021. The Streaming Wars on the 1st of June in 2022. Streaming Wars Part 2 on the 13th of July in 2022. All 4 were written and directed by Trey Parker. All 4 were produced under the agreement Parker and Stone had signed with Paramount in August of 2021. The show was, in producing them, inside the same streaming wars the 3rd and 4th specials would satirize. The post-COVID specials are set in a future timeline. The boys are adults in their 40s. The pandemic, in the canon of the specials, did not end. The visual texture borrows heavily from the 1982 film Blade Runner. The streets are wet, the lights are neon. Randy Marsh, now elderly, appears in one sequence walking through the rain in a deliberate restaging of the Roy Batty monologue from the end of that film. The adult Butters, in The Return of COVID, has been institutionalized. He calls himself Victor Chaos. He has, in the future history, made billions of dollars by convincing other people to buy NFTs. The act of selling has driven him into permanent obsessive evangelism for the asset class. He greets Stan and Kyle by attempting to sell them NFTs. He explains with manic energy that if everyone believes in NFTs, everyone involved will make money. The pitch is, in its structure, identical to the actual pitches delivered by actual NFT promoters across the previous year. The pitch is also, in its underlying logic, identical to the argument Margaritaville had been making about the economy in 2009. The asset is held together by belief. The belief produces value. The value produces more belief. A scene in the same special features a firefighter at the site of a disaster. He delivers a sustained monologue in the language of cryptocurrency promotion about everything he has lost. His savings are gone, his house is gone. He has in his account a digital image of a small green panda on a skateboard. He is then pulled away by a colleague who wants him to look at a small turtle with wings that might be a good investment. The season 25 premiere on the 2nd of February 2022, titled Pajama Day, extended the satire to the actual Matt Damon commercial for Crypto.com. Cartman rallies the classroom by asking what Matt Damon says in the Bitcoin commercial. Clyde answers, "Fortune favors the brave." Another child says his father listened to Matt Damon and lost all his money. Cartman replies that yes, everyone did, but they were brave in doing so. The exchange is the entire pandemic financial environment compressed into 3 lines. The Streaming Wars special turns to a different commercial competition. South Park is in the middle of a severe drought. The state of Colorado owns the water. The water park owner PP develops a plan to take over water rights so that, once the water is exhausted, he can sell urine as the only available substitute. The water commissioner calls him a psychopath. The metaphor is precise. The streaming corporations were attempting to corner specific markets in exactly the same way. The product was different, the strategy was identical. Randy, in the same special, has begun to be referred to as Karen. He has acquired the behavioral characteristics of the entitled middle-aged consumer. He produces sonic waves by saying the phrase, "I want to speak to your manager." The phrase has become, in the late pandemic economy, a weapon. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The pandemic specials caught capitalism at the moment it began trading self-referential signs in place of actual goods. The next move would turn the camera on the show's own corporate parent. Section 10, Sermon on the Mount, the $1.5 billion Paramount deal, and the show inside the system it is satirizing. There are 2 days in July of 2025 that, when placed next to each other, tell a story almost no observer of the American entertainment industry had expected to see. The first day is the 21st of July. On that day, Trey Parker and Matt Stone signed a 5-year deal with Paramount Skydance, the parent company of Comedy Central. The deal was valued at approximately $1.5 billion. The deal would produce 50 new episodes across the period. The deal was reported across the entertainment press as one of the largest individual creative creator deals in the history of American television. The second day is the 23rd of July. On that day, 2 days after the signing, Comedy Central broadcast the first new traditional South Park episode in over 2 years. The episode was titled Sermon on the Mount. The title was a deliberate pun. The mount of the title was Paramount, the company that had signed the deal 48 hours earlier. The episode was, in its primary content, a sustained satirical assault on Donald Trump and on Paramount itself. The corporate context the episode was responding to had been building across the previous several months. Paramount was in the process of being acquired by Skydance Media, an entertainment company run by David Ellison, the son of Oracle founder Larry Ellison. The acquisition required federal approval. In July of 2025, Paramount agreed to pay $16 million to settle a lawsuit Trump had filed against CBS and the program 60 Minutes over the editing of a Kamala Harris interview during the 2024 campaign. Days after the settlement, CBS announced the cancellation of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Colbert had been one of Trump's most consistent critics on broadcast television. The Skydance team had also committed to eliminating all domestic diversity programs at Paramount and to creating an ombudsman to address complaints of ideological bias in news coverage. The FCC, chaired by Trump appointee Brendan Carr, approved the merger on the 24th of July, the day after the South Park episode aired. Parker and Stone had been public about their frustration. They had posted on the show's official account that the merger was a shit show and was disrupting the production of the show. The season 27 premiere had been delayed by 2 weeks. Their legal team had reportedly threatened to sue Paramount and Skydance multiple times during the negotiations. They had initially pitched a 10-year, $3 billion agreement that Skydance had rejected. The episode that aired 2 days after the deal was signed was a direct response to all of it. The cartoon Trump in the episode was animated with a cutout photograph of the actual president's face attached to an animated body, in the visual style the show had previously reserved for Saddam Hussein in 1999. The voice was enhanced through deepfake technology developed by Parker and Stone's artificial intelligence company, Deep Voodoo. Trump was depicted in bed with Satan. Trump argued with Satan about whether his name appeared in the Jeffrey Epstein client files. The episode included a sequence in which Trump was given a micropenis, used as a recurring visual joke. The closing sequence was a public service announcement showing the actual face of Donald Trump, deep-faked onto a body, walking naked through a desert and removing his clothes. The Paramount component of the episode was, in commercial terms, the more significant move. Jesus in the episode is forced into the South Park elementary classroom as part of a settlement Paramount has made with the federal government. Jesus gathers the townspeople. He tells them, through clenched teeth, that they should not protest the situation. He points to the cancellation of Stephen Colbert. He tells the townspeople that Paramount owns CBS, that Paramount has paid Trump to make a problem go away, and that the townspeople should accept the religious indoctrination of their children rather than risk a similar settlement. This is, in plain terms, a public statement from the show's creators that the company that owns the show has been corrupted by its commercial relationship with the federal government. The statement is being delivered through Jesus. The statement is being delivered inside a Paramount-funded production. The statement is being delivered 2 days after Parker and Stone signed a $1.5 billion deal with the company they are accusing of corruption. The structural argument of the episode is, when read carefully, the same argument the show had been making about capitalism for nearly 30 years. The corporation is the customer made flesh. The customer is the corporation made into a building. The system is held together by belief. The belief is administered by people who do not fully understand the mechanisms they are administering. The compromises accumulate. The compromises eventually consume the original purpose. The system survives the departure of any individual operator. The system is the underlying structure. The companies are interchangeable. What the Sermon on the Mount episode achieved, in the framework of all of this, was the show's most precise demonstration of its own thesis. The show had argued in Gnomes in 1998 that big corporations grow because they sell what people prefer to buy. The show had argued in Walmart in 2004 that the consumer is the engine. The show had argued in Human Centipede in 2011 that the modern consumer has signed contracts the consumer cannot read. The show had argued in Margaritaville in 2009 that the economy is a religion. The show had argued in The City Part of Town in 2015 that capitalism extracts profit by asking consumers to perform virtue. The show had argued in The Tegrity Arc that small businesses become large businesses by repeating the same compromises. The show had argued in Banned in China in 2019 that American entertainment had been selling its speech for foreign market access. In July of 2025, the show demonstrated that the system it had been describing could absorb even even its sharpest critic, because the sharpest critic was now operating inside the system at a commercial scale that made his criticism profitable for the system to publish. The deal had been signed. The episode had aired. The corporation had paid the critic to deliver the criticism. The criticism had not, in the end, threatened the corporation. The criticism had been monetized by the corporation. The corporation was richer for having published it. The critic was richer for having delivered it. The argument the show had been making since 1998 was, in this final demonstration, complete. Capitalism's most sophisticated tactic was to absorb its critics rather than to silence them. South Park was, in the summer of 2025, the proof. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.